Hello everyone, my name is Rayven. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Rainbow Veteran, and welcome back to another episode of the Rainbow Veteran Podcast. I hope everyone had a fun and safe holiday season and a great start to your new year. I know a lot of things are going on right now that aren't great in this country, and I feel like I'm going to add to that fire, unfortunately, because today I am going to be talking about a very heavy topic. I'm going to be talking about the systemic attacks on the transgender community by the federal government. And only the federal government. This could have had stateside stuff as well, but it was already going to be a lot of research and everything just on the federal government to the point where I have like a 30 something page like show notes, and it's almost like I did a college thesis here just on the federal government, and I had to trim a lot of it down for what I have right now. So it's going to be heavy, and I do want to let you guys know that right now, but I feel like I need to talk about what's going on because a lot of stuff that is going on is going to affect a lot of other people. We've already seen how attacks on transgender individuals in this country affects women's rights. It's going to affect a lot of rights for other people, and it's just going to be another thing we have to be cognitive of. So, this isn't in any timeline order, it's not in any chronological order. I do have it set in kind of like topic specific order, just for my own sanity, and kind of being able to do things. And with that, I'm going to start with legal identity and federal recognition. And this has been a big thing since Trump took office. This has been a big thing, and it goes back to a January 20th, 2025 executive order titled Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. Now, spoiler alert, a lot of stuff goes back to this. It goes back to this, and another one like involving like quote unquote protecting children from gender extremism or something like that, which is also in the show notes here. But a lot of this, of like legal definitions, come back to this part. I've read it before. I'm not going to read the entire thing here. I am going to like just read certain sections of it and kind of go over what, as a baseline, this does. It starts with, by the authority vested in me as president, by the Constitution, the laws of the United States, yada, yada, yada. I hereby order, Section 1, Purpose. Across the country, ideologues who deny the biological reality of sex have increasingly used legal and other societal coercive means to permit men to self-identify as women and gain access to intimate single-sex spaces and activities designed for women, from women's domestic abuse shelters to women's workplace showers. Oddly enough, I think it's very funny that, in all of this, the ones who are actually denying biological reality of sex not being just black and white like we were explained in grade school in a very simple manner are the ones that are denying the science. And I think it's very ironic that we have a president who, let's be honest, probably couldn't even pronounce ideologues or understand what half of the shit was. This is wrong. That's probably him. Efforts to eradicate the biological reality of sex fundamentally attack women by depriving them of their dignity, safety, and well-being. And yet, going after the trans community has screwed up so many more things for cisgender people, especially women as a whole. The attacks on trans rights are just a backdoor way to fuck over women's rights. Let's be honest. That's all it fucking is. The erasure of sex in language and policy has a coercive impact not just on women, but on the validity of the entire American system. Basing federal policy on truth is critical to scientific inquiry, public safety, and morale, and trust in the government itself. Yet you're using transphobic turf language and denying science itself. This unhealthy road is paved by ongoing and purposeful attacks against the ordinary and long-standing use and understanding of biological and scientific terms, replacing the immutable biological reality with an internal, fluid, and subjective sense of self unmoored from biological facts. Intersex people exist. It's not really black and white, just on that alone. But let's continue. Invalidating the true and biological category of woman, it's actually in quotes here, improperly transform laws and policies designed to protect sex-based opportunities into laws and policies that undermine them, replacing long-standing cherished legal rights and values with an identity-based, inchoate societal concept. Accordingly, my administration will defend women's rights and protect freedom of conscience by using clear and accurate language and policies that recognize women as biologically female and men as biologically male. Now, this next section is where things get really muddled, and they kind of are stupid with this. Like I said in the first episode, where I actually take note of how they define things, they actually kind of screw up the definition of sex and gender and everything inside this. So I'm going to read policy and definitions, and with this is where a lot of legal documents kind of get screwed over, from like IDs, passports, birth certificates, and it's going to have a lot of repercussions on people's safety, innocent people who are just living their lives. It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. These sexes are not changeable and are grounded in fundamental and incontrovertible reality. Under my direction, the executive branch will enforce all sex protective laws to promote this reality, and the following definitions shall govern all executive interpretation and application of federal law and administrative policy. Sex shall refer to an individual's immutable biological classification as either male or female. Sex is not a synonym for and does not include the concept of gender identity, but yet intersex people exist, and if you're looking at chromosomes, there's a lot of things that like make it really hard for a person to be female or male. You can have a woman with XY chromosomes, you can have a man with XX chromosomes, and it's just they are born that way. And yet, when you tell MAGA, they just want to put their fingers in their ears and not listen to the science. They just want to keep their ignorance, honestly, and they don't want to challenge their own thought process. Women, or woman, or girls and girl, shall mean an adult and juvenile human female, respectively. Men, or man, and boys, or boy, shall mean adult and juvenile human male, respectively. Female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. And male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. And this is where a lot of people who actually understand biology kind of giggle and laugh to ourselves, because at conception, we're all fucking female. It actually takes a bit for the Y chromosome to actually start doing anything or even present itself. So at conception, so we're all female according to this documentation. So here, I do, unfortunately, with printing this to read, it did get a little screwy, so I did miss a section of how they understand gender ideology. But basically replaces the biological category of sex with an ever-shifting concept of a self-assessed gender identity, permitting the false claim that men can change their gender into women and women can change their gender into men, or any of a vast spectrum of genders that are disconnected from one sex. That last line, which kind of just me filling in the gaps based on the print, because of the White House page, fucked up the entire section, so I was kind of figuring that out based on the bottom of the lettering. Gender ideology is an internal inconsistent in that it diminishes sex as an indefinable or useful category, but nevertheless maintains that it's possible for a person to be born in the wrong sex body. We have science to back that up. There are trans people who have their brain structure mimic those of their cisgender counterparts. We have science for that. And we have history too. We have sociology and anthropological. Is that what I'm thinking? Anthropological study of ancient humans. Anyway, we have historical context of this, like trans and their gender things are not new. Gender identity reflects a full internal and subjective sense of self, disconnected from biological reality and sex, and existing on an infinite continuum that does not provide a meaningful basis for identification and cannot be recognized as a replacement for sex. So, systematically, that just basically breaks it down into the fact that this administration is going to do whatever it can to fuck over trans people in any legal federal identification. And it's going to narrow down how the system works. And that screws over people with X markers like my spouse who are non-binary. And it makes it kind of we're going backwards on trans rights. And that was just the start. Because it's going to get worse here. I'm probably just going to read part of Section 3 and then move on, because a lot of this is kind of going back to it. But Section 1 through 3 are the most important. I do really wish that you read more of this if you have the energy and spoons for it. Because a lot of federal recognition come from this, and a lot of other stuff goes into kind of similar sets with Section 3. So, Section 3, recognizing women are biologically distinct from men. Within 30 days of this order, the Secretary of Health and Human Services shall provide to the U.S. government, external partners, and public clear guidance expanding on the sex-based definitions set forth in this order. Each agency and all federal employees shall enforce laws governing sex-based rights, protections, opportunities, and accommodations to protect men and women as biologically distinct sexes. Each agency should therefore be given terms sex, male, female, men, women, boys, and girls, the meaning set forth in Section 2 of this order when interpreting or applying statuses, regulations, or guidances in all other official agencies, businesses, documents, and communications. So that's right there. The federal government is going to narrow down its view on what sex and gender do and protections. So this screws things up with sex-based protections under Title IX, things with the military, things with the VA system, Medicaid, Medicare funding, passports, federal recognition, identification paperwork, birth certificates. It creates a whole mess of issues. When administering and enforcing sex-based distinctions, every agency and all federal employees acting in official capacity on behalf of their agency shall use the term sex and not gender in all applications of federal policies and documents. The Secretaries of State and Homeland Security and the Director of the Office of Personnel Management shall implement changes to require that government-issued identification documents, including passport, visas, and global entry cards, accurately reflect the holder's sex, as defined under Section 2 of this order, and the Director of the Office of Personnel Management shall ensure that the applicable personal records accurately report federal employees' sex as defined by Section 2 of this order. So now you're also fucking not only people who live in America, but people who come into America. Because what if someone is from India? They have a legally recognized third gender in their country. And so you're going to, and they come over on a visa for whatever reason, like a work visa to work with the VA, to actually become a doctor maybe in this country and help VA employees, because the VA actually trains a lot of doctors comparatively to the private sector. And now you're going to fuck over their paperwork and actually make it harder for them to come into the country. And now we lost a doctor that could have helped the vet. And, and or any other country that, recognizes their gender. Just India's the first one always comes to mind for me, because I have a friend who I served with who identifies with that gender. It's Hijra or something like that. I can't remember. I'm not good at any of the Indian language. I do apologize. But I see them and I'm like, hey, yeah, you're that third gender. You moved back to India. You're with your family there. Just stay. Just stay. Don't come back right now. Everything's a shit show. Don't come back right now. But this order, going back to it, this order set the groundwork for federal government to not recognize transgender and also very more accurately, especially put a target on non-binary people in this country. Thanks to Section 2, federal identifications were no longer allowed to have corrected gender markers. This includes passports, common access cards for military personnel, veterans, federal employees, and their dependents. If you had a trans kid, that screwed up a lot of stuff and could have made it harder for them to leave base and then get back on, because then it's no longer a valid ID. And you have a child stuck outside base. Now, I'm hoping that the gate guards or whatever, Master Arms or security forces, I don't remember what armies or Marines are, but, these people understand what's going on and be like, oh, I know this kid, they live here, I know that they live here, let's let them back on base. And actually, treat them well and not cause a stink about it. But X markers are also no longer recognized by the federal government, and those with them on their passports can and have struggled to return to the U.S., even being barred if they were from another country. As well as things like amended birth certificates, which I'm in the process myself of getting, are no longer recognized for federal identification purposes. So even if your state lets you amend your birth certificate, the federal government will not recognize it if you try to use it in support of a new passport or federal ID. Now, a lot of people in MAGA go on about states' rights and everything, and kind of like, oh, we should get education back to the states, even though it's already fucking is. But then you guys look at this stuff, and if it's something you don't agree with, you're okay with the federal government ignoring states' rights. It's weird. It's really weird. The Don't Tread on Me crowd are really fond of having the boots on their backs. But this doesn't actually stop for identification. It also removed gender identity from forms, data collections, and federal guidance. So the federal government is no longer doing research on how the transgender community is being affected and marginalized. They're no longer doing research of data of how many people are on welfare, how many people are actually doing all right, how many people are living in certain areas and how that affects the economy or community. And they removed training that would help transgender individuals and the entire LGBT community, let's be honest, in federal hospitals and even the suicide hotline. The National Suicide Hotline. Because, if something's going on and you're being targeted for being who you are, nothing says go fuck yourself like the government making sure that people on the other end of the hotline don't know how to help you. And this affects military veterans and our families. And we've talked about this before. But they first started with, they didn't even start with banning trans people in the military, but that was a big thing when he was running, was banning transgender personnel from serving in our country. And he started during his first term with this and wasn't as successful as he is right now. It's actually part of the reason why I didn't get to re-enlist during his first administration, because I was actually in the process of trying to go to ROTC at Penn State. And I had that rug yanked right underneath me. I thought about serving my country again. But thanks to Trump, I couldn't. And I still can't. And you know what? I don't want to with the way everything's going on in this country right now. But even though there were years of examples of transgender service members serving with zero issues, zero negative outcome on the lethality or the camaraderie or the morale or the, unity of the military, transgender people served our military with zero fucking issues. And they are getting the shaft. They state that it affects military readiness when it doesn't. We already know. We had at least 4 years to show that it didn't do shit to the military. Not at all. And if you go on Reddit, you'll see most in-service people are pissed off at this because this whole witch hunt against other Americans is affecting morality in the military. You're affecting the readiness of our military, MAGA. You are. And this administration is. They say that people with gender dysphoria or have any gender-affirming medical care do not fit the physical or mental standards of the military. But let's look at that. Gender-affirming care. What about gynecomastia? Is that how you say it? Where they chop, if you develop breasts as a male and you develop breast tissue, you can get that taken off. That's gender-affirming surgery. Your Vicodin, that's gender-affirming gender-affirming medication. If you're low T, that's gender-affirming. If you're going through menopause, HRT, estrogen, that's gender-affirming. If you want a boob job, that's gender-affirming care. But the moment a trans person does it, that's when it's an issue, right? And I'm just pointing this all out to show the hypocrisy, the double standard of not only this administration, but all these transphobic fuckwads that are out there in this world. And it's funny because we have examples of trans fighter pilots serving our country, going into active war zones, hitting the enemy in a fighter jet with no fucking issue. And most notable is Commander Emily Schilling. And if you want, I actually will probably do an episode on her because she is a fucking badass. But zero issues, was still an effective fighter pilot. And went through all the clearances again. And to show medically, she was an effective fighter pilot and was able to clear all the medical stuff she needed to. And we also have allied military forces. England, Germany, at least, I know at least those two. Maybe France, I'm not 100% sure with France. But at least England and Germany, I know, have transgender people in their military. And guess what? It's done bubkiss to them. They still are effective militaries. There was also an NDAA, or the National Defense... This is the National Defense Budget. I can't remember what the AA stand for. It's not Alcoholics Anonymous or Airborne. But in 2024... they even slowly started chipping away with transgender care for our service members then, before Trump even got elected. Because it started with the refusal for dependents to have gender-affirming care, and now has gotten to the removals of pride flags on bases, including in and or on base housing. And they can't even use TRICARE to get access to gender-affirming care outside of military hospitals. They say they go to a civilian doctor. And this has also affected veterans at the VA. At first, it was removing DEI language around LGBT veterans. Then the 988 veteran hotline was no longer being trained on LGBT veterans and how things affect our mental health in the community. And then eventually, thanks to fucking Collins, made it so that there are no new care for veterans at the VA, stating that the VA should not be focused on helping veterans attempt to change their sex. Even though veterans are in Priority Group 1, are allowed to get all of their medical care at the VA, and others who receive non-service connected care in other groups get it at it with low copays. But it is all medical care. And newsflash, gender affirming care is medical care. And even now, if a veteran lost care at the VA or was in process of getting care started and it stopped, VA doctors can't even write letters or notes of support for getting care outside the VA. Which in a lot of states, including Pennsylvania, is a long process to get that care. You got to go to therapy. You got to talk to like 3 doctors in some states. You have to go to a lot of hoops if you're just starting to get your care. It's a lot easier if you go from one doctor to another if you're already getting care. But there's a lot of hurdles to just get that care started. In a lot of states, it's even worse than here in PA. It's taken some people years to get that care started. But now VA doctors can't even write letters to show, hey, we already got half the work done. Here's all the documentation. They can't even do that. And now people are back at square one. Staff at the VA have been ordered to dead name and misgender veterans in their medical documentation, which is hard on staff too, because staffs don't want to be rude to the veterans. They want to take care of us. And a lot of them know that misgendering or dead naming us affects us. And it's really not that big of an issue, because what if some guy's name's Robert and he prefers to go by Bob? That's not an issue. But if I want to go by Rayven because I'm trans, all of a sudden it's an issue, according to the federal government. Staff can't support transgender veterans even themselves, like just being supportive, because they can lose their fucking jobs. In a time where we have super low employment levels for the VA, to the point where rural VAs are under the threat of closing. We have cut jobs and stopped hiring for the VA. And I understand that, like, oh, there's a little bit of a hiring freeze when you go from, like, one president administration to another. But they just stopped trying to hire people. They've cut hiring positions for a lot of folks and are starting to shut down certain sectors of the VA. And now you want to threaten people's jobs for being supportive of transgender veterans? Like, what the fuck? It's just another excuse to try to get the VA to get privatized. It's another cog in that wheel. And any transgender staff at the VA have lost their ability to get gender-affirming care with their federal insurance policies. And staff, they technically can't have any pride flags or pins in their office or on them, because that is now grounds for firing. Now, some VAs are a lot more looser with that, and I applaud them for it. But just knowing that's policy is bullshit. And that was just the tip of the iceberg, folks. Because it's going to get so much worse. Especially with everything going on with law enforcement and ideology. The Department of Justice has instructed the FBI to crack down on supposed domestic terrorists, organizations that the definition of which include promote radical gender ideology. Part of that crackdown involves the establishment of a cash reward system for providing information on leaders of so-called domestic terrorist organizations. U.S. Attorney Pam Bondi issued a memorandum to federal prosecutors and law enforcement agencies on December 4th, 2025, in accordance with NSPM 7, President Donald Trump's September directive ordering the investigation of domestic terrorist organizations. At the time, NSP 7 did not include or come with any enforcement mechanisms. Bondi's memo provides specific instructions to prosecutors and law enforcement agencies. The language contained in Bondi's memo is reminiscent of that found in the September report from the independent journalist Ken Klippenstein. Sorry if I mispronounced your name there, Ken. In the report, two anonymous national security experts claimed the FBI intended to categorize trans people as nihilistic, violent extremists, a threat category that was created earlier in 2025 The FBI defines nihilistic violent extremists as criminal conduct in furtherance of political, social, or religious goals that derive primarily from a hatred of society at large and a desire to bring about its collapse by sowing indiscriminate chaos. This also ties neatly into the ongoing right-wing attempts to scapegoat trans people for mass shootings and other forms of gun violence, including the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which, if you guys remember, they were all, oh, it's a trans person, that's why they did it, oh, now they have a trans girlfriend, who, the girlfriend, which I'm going to be saying very loosely here, because I still don't know a lot of the information around that specifically, was giving them everything they needed to prosecute the shooter. And was being open about it. And was like, hey, here's what happened, here's what I got. And then they tried making her the bad guy. And noting all the federal government's messaging about domestic terrorism ignores the fact that a vast majority of research points to the fact that a lot of domestic terrorists, especially in the US, are aligned with the right wing. The guy who attempted to shoot Donald Trump, MAGA, Republican, right-winger. The guy who shot Charlie Kirk, a fan of Nick Fuentes and super right-wing. What is it, Groyper? A lot of the things that are going on, like the attack of the synagogue here in Pittsburgh a few years ago, right-wing extremists. A lot of these high-profile crimes that are coming out in the U.S., guess what, are white, right-wing fucking nut jobs. But no, it's trans people. Trans people are the issue every time. And people like to bring up, like, oh, well, the last 5 shootings were trans people. Since 2018, we've had 3 trans shooters. And that was 2 of them aren't even confirmed to be trans. It's speculative. So fuck yourself, MAGA. We even have the FBI right now, as of earlier this year, like even just the beginning of this year, threatening a black transgender woman with actions against her if she does not stop writing about her experience as a trans woman and removing all of her previous writings. So we have the government actively censoring trans people. Again, you 2A, don't tread on me fuckers are really enjoying the boot that is being put on the backs of Americans just because you are filled with bigotry and hate. Hell, technically, this whole episode, everything I'm talking about, this whole podcast can make me labeled as a domestic terrorist here in the United States because I advocate for transgender rights. As a trans person myself, I advocate for the rights of not just me, not just the LGBT community, but everyone in America. But because I specifically advocate also for the trans community, I can be labeled as a domestic terrorist. As a fucking veteran, do you have any idea how hard that is on someone's psyche? As a veteran, to be labeled as a domestic terrorist because I advocate for everyone in this country to be treated equally. And I said this on my TikTok and I'll say it here. Go fuck yourself, FBI. Come and get me, you no-balled little limp dick fuckers. And it is also being threatened of freezing federal funds. Since the beginning of the second Trump administration, they have been constantly threatening to freeze the fundings from schools, organizations, and even states that promote transgenderism ideology or Marxist equality. Which, reminder for everyone at home, being trans is not an ideology. Being MAGA is a political ideology, but being trans is not. Being LGBT is not an ideology. And also, what the fuck is Marxist equality? Oh no, I want the whole one nation being representative. I want the American dream for everybody. I want we the people, meaning all of us, is Marxist equality? Well, guess the fucking founding fathers were Marxist then. And speaking of freezing federal funds, this fucks over education and Title IX. they removed gender identity from Title IX discrimination things. The removal of gender identification protection from Title IX was recently reversed by the Department of Education, which had previously implemented changes to Title IX that included protections for gender identity and sexual orientation. This decision was made after a Kentucky federal court ruled that Biden's administration's 2024 Title IX changes were unconstitutional, stating that the Department of Education lacked the authority to expand the definition of Title IX to include gender identity discrimination. The reverted rule now defines sex to mean objective, immutable characteristics of being born male or female, and effectively stripping protections for LGBT students. Now, this opens the door for a lot of shit with schools. This opens it for harassment from fellow students, discrimination from the schools, and the entire LGBT students in K through 12 and universities across the country are now having a target on their back. Because this whole thing argued that a lot of the discrimination against LGBT community had the basics of discrimination based on sex or the perception of a person's sex. And that is still sex-based discrimination, you idiots. I'm going very loose with this episode. I do apologize. I have been doing this research for about a damn month, and I try to keep space away for the holidays and try to give myself space to enjoy everything. And I've been sitting on this for a while, and I'm just so pissed off of what this country is doing, and the not repeating, but the rhyming with certain things in history. And the Department of Education has also threatened to pull funds from schools that allow transgender students to use facilities that are consistent with their gender identity. This is following the executive order keeping men out of women's sports. Under Trump's new order, the Secretary of Education must prioritize civil rights cases against schools and athletic associations governed by the educational institutes that allow transgender girls to play on girls' teams. He directed the secretary to revoke funding to schools that don't comply. Beyond just K through 12 schools, Trump is also seeking to influence major athletic organizations and governing bodies like the Olympics, which are slated to convene in Los Angeles in 2028. Now, here's the thing to fucking think about. The organization that oversees the Olympics allowed transgender athletes to start competing in 2004. If my memory is correct, somewhere around 2018 to 2021, the first one openly trans person, because there were some who competed and weren't openly trans, but the first openly trans athlete competed and didn't even fucking win at the Olympic level. Let's just point that. People are so upset, like Riley Gaines are like, oh, trans people, when you tied with someone who was trans for 5th, and you're salty about it. Like, what the fuck? We had almost 20 years, a little around 20 years until, Trump basically and MAGA, did their whole big hissy fit thinking someone was trans when she fucking wasn't. Because she's a little more masculine in her looks, thought she was trans. And now the Olympics can't have trans people, but they've had 0 incidents where transgender athletes were dominating sports like these fucking half-wits think. In the order, he directs his assistant for domestic policy to convene representatives from those organizations along with female athletes to promote policies that are fair and safe in the best interests of female athletes. Most likely getting transphobic ones like Riley fucking Gaines. And consistent with Title IX, the federal law prohibiting sex discrimination at schools that receive federal funding. He directs Secretary of State Marco Rubio to engage with the International Olympic Committee, that's it, that's the one I couldn't think of earlier, to ensure that eligibility for participation in women's sporting events is determined according to sex and not gender identity or testosterone reduction. So, what if a cis woman's just naturally high testosterone? You gotta stop her from being in the Olympics in 2028? That's a shit these dumbasses don't think of. And I'm sorry, listeners, I'm sorry, everybody at home. This shit really gets me because a lot of it is just half thought, half baked, quarter baked thought processes from bigots, and I never understand the thought process with bigotry, and there is none, because it's just their hate. It's the irony of the crowd that always shouts facts over feelings are the ones who actually run on the feelings over facts. And now we're going to start going into gender-affirming care by reading or at least parts of it, maybe not in full, we'll see how it goes, of Executive Order Protecting Children from Chemical and Surgical Mutilation. This came out on January 28th, 2025, so I didn't read this on the big executive order, the first week of the presidency last year. By authority vested in me by President of the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered, Section 1, Policy and Purpose. Across the country today, medical professionals are maiming and sterilizing a growing number of impressionable children under the radical and false claims that adults can change a child's sex through a series of irreversible medical interventions. This dangerous trend will be a stain on our nation's history, and it must end. Now, first off, no one's getting sterilized. At most, kids are getting puberty blockers, and then when they're a little older, HRT. Which, newsflash, trans people can still get other people pregnant. Not sure if you knew that. And, at most, puberty blockers, if they are getting them as a child and then stopping them, like say they don't go with transitioning, maybe they just didn't, whatever the reason, they just stop the puberty blockers, guess what? That's also reversible. It just makes them a late bloomer. Hell, we get that with cis kids. Cis kids who start puberty too early will get on these puberty blockers and then go through puberty when it's a more appropriate time for their body. And guess what? It's caused... I'm not going to say it hasn't caused any issues, because medications always have a risk to them, but it's not making things irreversible. It's not sterilizing kids. It's just puberty blockers. It's just going to delay something that happens. And yet, oh no, think of the kids. Countless children soon regret that they have been mutilated and begin to grasp the horrifying tragedy that they will never be able to conceive children of their own or nurture children through breastfeeding. Again, trans people can have kids. Trans people have had kids, even on HRT. Does it make it harder? Sure, it makes it harder, but trans people have had kids. I don't get it. Also, trans people, what? Moreover, these vulnerable... Oh yeah, no, I remember what I was going to bring up there. Also, countless children. Transgender people make up 1% of this nation's population. 1%. Out of all the detransitioners, all of them included, that makes up roughly, 0.3% of the transgender community? And most detransitioners are pausing their transition to stay safe because they live in a state like Texas or fucking Kentucky or Oregon or fucking Florida where it's not safe to be openly trans. And then they get to a point where it is safe and they start transitioning again. There's also things like parents, family. There could be a medical reason that someone stops taking HRT. Maybe they have a history of breast cancer and they realize, you know what, I got to a point where I'm good. I'm just not going to take any more medication. But there's a very, very small handful of those who actually do detransition, realize, you know what, I'm not trans. Maybe I'm just more of a tomboy or a more effeminate guy. Whatever. And most of them are still very strong trans advocates. There's maybe less than my fingers on my right hand of people who are like, oh, I transitioned, it was horrible. Most of those that are saying that they are trans and are super, like, I'm a detransitioner and I don't support the trans community because I was brainwashed. Most of them are just fucking idiots, plants, disingenuous people who are literally just trying to grift America. Because, like, the regret rate for trans people is so low. It's lower than most medical surgeries. If I got a surgery on my knee, there's a higher regret rate for me to have that surgery than there is for people transitioning. There is a higher regret rate of knee surgery than there are for people who transition. And a lot of the time, the regret rate for transitioning is from the older crowd where the medical science wasn't as great and people had bottom surgery and guess what? Lost sensation in their lower half. That's gotten better. So the regret rate's even going lower. But you tell MAGA this and they're just like, oh, the feelings over facts. Moreover, these vulnerable youth's medical bills may rise throughout their lifetime as they are often trapped with lifelong medical complications, a losing war with their own body, and tragically, sterilization. Misinformation from this administration. Who's surprised? I'm not. Because guess what? You can stop HRT. I'm on estrogen, and I've been on it for like 8 fucking years. I can stop it. I'm actually at a point where I'm okay. I just keep doing it because I still want to continue it for a little bit longer. But I can stop it and still be fucking as trans as I was the day I started. You don't have to be on HRT the entire time. You can be on a super low dosage. You can be on a super high dosage. There's a lot of conversations about levels and everything. You got to talk with your doctor. But guess what? You're not trapped by the medical system. It's not like you have diabetes and, it costs $1,000 for your insulin. But we don't want to focus on that. We rather focus on trans people. We rather focus on cultural wars or whatever. Accordingly, it is the policy of the United States that it will not fund, sponsor, promote, assist, or support the so-called transition of a child from one sex to another, and it will rigorously enforce all laws that prohibit or limit the destructive, life-altering procedures. Second term, or the second one goes into definitions, basically just saying, like, like, what's a child? What's a pediatric doctor? But here, the phrase chemical and surgical mutilation, this is where I want to actually focus on here. The phrase chemical and surgical mutilation means the use of puberty blockers, including GnRH agonists and other interventions, to delay the onset or progression of normally timed puberty in an individual who does not identify as his or her sex. The use of sex hormones such as androgen blockers, estrogen, progesterone, or testosterone to align an individual's physical appearance with an identity that differs from his or her sex, and surgical procedures that attempt to transform an individual's physical appearance to align with an identity that differs from his or her sex, or attempt to alter or remove an individual's sex organs to minimize or destroy their natural biological functions. This phrase sometimes is referred to as gender-affirming care. Now, we already talked about things that are gender-affirming care a little bit ago in this episode. But here's the thing. Notice how it says all this for not identifying with their sex. So, these things are bad for kids who are trans, but, all of this for cis kids, oh no, it's perfectly fine. Now, that's the thing with this. It's a double fucking standard. This whole administration is a double fucking standard, and I hate hypocrisy with a passion. But also, no one's performing gender confirmation surgeries on any minors. Like, let's just put it that way, plain and simple. Not even the thing for, like, guys who develop breast tissues. Most of the time, at the youngest, it's 17. But on average, it's 18, almost 19 years old for these surgeries on guys, right? And the thought of like, oh, we're just giving hysterectomies and bottom surgery to trans kids at the age of 8 or 16. Like, no one's doing that. No one's fucking doing that. It is super rare. Like, no one's doing gender confirmation surgery on a minor. Nobody is. It's super, super rare. And there's a lot of fucking hurdles to get there, but it is super fucking rare anybody has gender confirmation surgery before the age of 19. And even then, they're making it harder to oh, you have to be 21 to get confirmation surgery. Like, what the fuck? They already have it hard enough where people, like cis people, want hysterectomies. So... And then Section 3 goes into ending reliance on junk science. The blatant harm done to children by chemical and surgical mutilation cloaks itself in medical necessity, spurred by guidance from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH, which lacks scientific integrity. Now, here's the thing. WPATH has support from a lot of medical industry, or not industries, but organizations that did like studies in multiple countries, even here in the United States, where they try to debunk transgender condition or like gender affirming care helping people. Like in Utah, their own study debunked the claims that gender affirming care hurts people. It really doesn't. And it's frustrating. It is beyond frustrating that like they're the ones saying that, oh, this is junk science, when they're the ones ignoring the science behind everything. And I already brought up, like, in this, too, it talks about, like, organizations of medical care, pulling funding from places and stopping certain things from providing gender-affirming care for minors. And I already brought up that TRICARE is no longer being able to do that. But there's also now limitations for adults. We're seeing this with the 2025 NDAA, making HRT and therapy only covered with TRICARE. Like, you can only get HRT and therapy, nothing else. This excludes surgery for intersex people, but that is a really uphill battle to provide proper documentation for that as well. But steps are also being made by both RFK Jr. and Oz to use Medicaid and Medicare fundings as a threat to hospitals that provide gender affirming care of any kind to minors. And I want to make something clear here, as well as when they say minors, they usually mean the community as a whole. Because we've seen it with the NDAAs, that you start with minors, and then you're going to start chipping away at the adults, and be like, okay, up until you're 18, we'll cover it. Oh, you know what? Up until you're 22, we'll cover it. When you turn 22, we'll start covering it. Actually, you know what? We're just going to cover HRT and therapy. Actually, we're just going to cover therapy. Actually, you know what? We're just going to fuck everyone all together and say, no, you can't get shit. Because that is the pattern that they're doing. And it starts with the military, it starts with veterans, and then it goes into the entirety of the country. And we've seen it happen to federal employees, because federal employees lost all forms of gender-affirming care with their federal insurance. Federal employees have lost that care due to a policy change implemented by the Trump administration, which took place on January 1st, 2026. It took place this year, the moment it turned 2026. It eliminated coverage for gender-affirming care under the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program and Postal Service Health Benefits Plans. The policy directed by the Office of Personnel Management stated that chemical and surgical modification of an individual's sex traits through medical interventions will no longer be covered under health insurance programs for federal employees and U.S. postal workers. So to all the people who are saying, like, oh, no, we don't care if you're an adult and do it. We just care that, you're going for the minors. No. They're doing it for the adults, too. So don't give me that, oh, no, it's just the kids bullshit. They're trying to undermine every trans person from getting care. They're just using kids as the stepping stone, which is why the trans community is always vocal about it. Because we've seen shit happen with the LGBT community as a whole. When it was gay rights, you guys did the exact same fucking thing. And we're not letting you try to get away with the same bullshit you used to in the 80s. Back in December RFK Jr. led a press conference with Oz, spreading a whole slew of misinformation on gender-affirming care in hospitals. And they were planning to place rules into effect that if any hospital provides any form of care for a minor, they will pull federal funding of Medicare and Medicaid from that hospital. Now, this is all forms, from just therapy to blockers to HRT. So if these rules go into effect, they will literally shut down hospitals by pulling these fundings away, especially in these rural areas, which pushes more of hate and attacks on the trans community by pinning others in our immediate community against us, and they're the ones making these issues happen. Around the same time as the press conference, the FDA, under the direction of RFK Jr., sent 11 letters to 11 different companies: Trans Guys Supply, The Fluxion, Gender Bender LLC, Shapeshifter Apparel, Marley Washington Design, Tomboy X, Flavant Streetwear, Early to Bed, Tom Scout, For Them, and Untag, formerly Trans Missy, and threatened them with fines and seizures if they do not register their binders as Class 1 medical devices. And luckily, I was able to find a copy of a letter that was sent to Untag, and I'll read it now for you. Warning letter, CMS number 720852, dated December 16th, 2025. Dear Dana Curvers, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, I'm so sorry. The United States Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, has reviewed Transmissy BVD Untag's, parentheses, your firm, website, and observed that your website offers various breast binders for sale. Under Section 201H of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, these products are devices because they are intended to use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in cure, mitigate, treat, or prevention of disease, or to affect the structure or function of the body. Our review of the firm's websites revealed statements that these breast binders, example trade name short binder black, short binder extra strong black, gym binder, goes through a bunch of different ones, are intended to use for the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, or intended to affect the structure or function of the body, including, per your firm's website, quote, a binder works by pressing the breast flat against the chest, spreading the mass of the breast. This makes the breast appear flatter. Sorry, my cat wants my attention right now. Bear, I'm working, baby. I think he knows I'm upset. Where was I? Do you want to be on TV? You want to be on the show right now? Okay, hang on. Hey, come here, son. Come here. You can stay. Hi, everybody. This is my cat, Bear. Give a little hi to the camera. Okay. No, come on, sit down. Where was I? This makes the breast appear flatter and less present, which can help reduce gender dysphoria or any other uncomfortable feeling that you might get about your chest. Now, they're saying, oh, this is a medical device because you're trying to alleviate gender dysphoria. But we as the federal government don't actually recognize gender dysphoria. So, do you recognize it or do you not? That's the thing I'm confused about. Because if you're federally, like in the executive orders I read earlier, if you do not, recognize gender dysphoria and do not recognize that gender affirming care helps dysphoria, this whole letter and you going after these companies is a moot fucking point. Now I see why you're on my lap. Per your firm's website, most people wear a binder because it helps reduce any gender dysphoria that they experience about their breasts. Now, fun fact, cis people can get gender dysphoria. I know some lesbians who do not like having big boobs, can't afford to have, breast reduction surgery, so they wear binders. That's not a medical device. They sell compression sports tops at Target? You're going to make them be labeled as a medical device? What about Spanx? If you got, like me, you got a little bit of a muffin top, if I wear that alleviates some dysphoria or body dysmorphia, which would be, in your definition, a medical device. But you're not making them be classified as medical devices. No, you're only targeting the ones that affect trans people because you have this hate boner for trans people for some reason. Where am I? Binders can be worn by people who just had breast surgery. True. People who suffer from gender dysphoria. Per your firm's website, a binder can greatly help reduce body dysphoria and promote gender euphoria. Per your firm's website, reduced dysphoria binding alleviates the distress associated with a chest that does not align with one's gender identity, improved mental health. Participants in multiple studies reported reduced anxiety and depression, increased confidence, and great comfort in public spaces. Per your firm's website, gender-affirming garments can help you alleviate gender dysphoria by compressing or enhancing body parts that cause you negative feelings. As you can imagine, some of these gender-affirming practices, like wearing binders, are not entirely without risks. True, but are you going to start fucking doing that with medical tape? Because that's the replacement. A review also revealed statements that you manufacture these devices within the means of Section 510 of the Act. Under this section of the Act, manufacturers of medical devices are required to annually register with the FDA. In September 2007, this act was amended by the FDA Amendment Act of 2007 to require domestic and foreign device establishments to submit their annual establishment registration and device listing information to the FDA by electronic means during the period beginning on October 1st and ending December 31st of each year. Our records indicate you have not registered or listed these devices for the fiscal year 2026. Therefore, these devices are misbranded within the meaning of Section 502 of the Act, in that they were manufactured, prepared, propagated, compounded, or processed in an establishment that not duly registered under the Section 510 of the Act, and were not included in a list required by Section 510. Your firm should take prompt action to address any violations identified in this letter. Failure to adequately address this matter may result in regulatory action initiated by the FDA without further notice. These actions include, but are not limited to, seizures and injunction. Other federal agencies may take your compliance with the FD&C Act with its implementing regulations into account when considering the award of federal contracts. Please notify this office in writing within 15 business days from the date you receive this letter of the specific steps your firm has taken to address these noted violations, including an explanation of how your firm plans to prevent these violations or similar violations from occurring again, including documentation of the corrections and or corrective action which must address the systematic problems that your firm has taken. If your firm's planned corrections or corrective actions will occur over time, and please include a timetable for implementations of those activities. If corrections or corrective actions cannot be completed within 15 business days, state the reason for the delay and the time in which these activities will be completed. Please provide a translation of documentation not in English to facilitate our review. We will notify you regarding the adequacy of your firm's response and the need to re-inspect your firm's facility to verify the appropriate corrections and or corrective actions have been made. If you believe that your product is not in violation of the FD&C Act, include your reasoning and any supportive information of our consideration as part of the response sent to this email address. So, and then, sincerely yours, Michael J. Hoffman, Director, Office of Health and Technology, Gastroenterology, OBGYN, General Hospital, Urology Devices, Office of Periodic Evaluation and Quality Center for Devices and Radiological Health and Food and Drug Administration. So, you recognize gender dysphoria as a medical thing, even though the federal government doesn't. So, if the federal government says, hey, you're not trans, gender dysphoria is a hoax, gender-affirming things are hoaxes, it's all a fraud, then you cannot go after these companies for medical devices. And it's not just binders. They're basically making the roads to make binders, gaffs, packers, even fake breasts, bra stuffers, all class 1 medical devices because trans people use them. in which, if you just look at a binder, it looks like they're just trying to make sure that people don't bind for too long. And if you just look at it as they're just the binders, right? They're trying to make sure that people don't bind too long because, binding too long can, hurt, the ribs. It can mess with the rib shape. It can do things. Yeah, you know what else does that? Bras. Don't wear the right size bra. That can screw things up. If you sleep in your bra or if you wear it for too long, guess what? You can have indentations in your skin and in your ribs. You know what else does that? Besides bras, glasses. Now glasses, they are medical devices. But guess what? They can create indents in the head. You know what else creates indents in the head? Gamer headsets. Those are considered medical devices. But they can create indentations in the skull. We've seen it with streamers. So, yes, I understand people shouldn't bind for too long, but you are literally, like, bras, headsets, they have adverse effects, but they're not being regulated like bras are. They're binders. But they're also looking to make it for all the other stuff. And they're looking at things that they can easily see and that they're trying to shut down to make things less accessible for trans people in the U.S. Well, most Class 1 medical devices are easy to get your hands on. Think of like bandages, gloves, thermometers. They still require a lot of steps to go through before they can be put on the shelves. And it requires very specific registration and fees. Now, this is coming from, this next part is a quote from Xander Shepard, director of Gender Bender, one of the companies that got the letter, when they were speaking with the Advocate. There are absolutely medical treatments and procedures to treat gender dysphoria. But to call a chest binder a medical device, specifically because it's marketed towards trans people, in order to control it and make it more inaccessible, is absurd and clearly discrimination. Regular chest binders for pre-op use aren't a medical device in the same way that scissors used to give someone a gender-affirming haircut isn't a medical device. They added, push-up bras, which can be used for gender-affirming garment, can also temporarily shift breast tissue into one's desired shape, yet you wouldn't call that a medical device. And Xander's correct. This is the hypocrisy with this bullshit. And there's more. ACA section 1557 is getting rollbacks now. So the Trump administration, and this is my last thing I have for the show notes before my conclusion, but the Trump administration basically rolled back ACA section 1557, which protects medical patients from discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. In May 2024, HHS issued regulations that relied on the evolving Title IX rules incorporated by reference into Section 1557 to provide discrimination based on sex. Specifically includes discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics, pregnancy, and sex stereotypes. But now those are gone. There aren't the same protections under sex like there were in 2024. Now, you can be discriminated against based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and in a way sex stereotypes, because what do you mean you're a woman and you're more masculine? You must be transgender. Discrimination. So if you're any sense of LGBT or even just not the proper way of what sex should be by this administration, hospitals can discriminate against you, and they're protected in that way. Including the V-fucking-A, where people like my mom, who are very more masculine women, can get discriminated against because they're not female enough. And there's a lot of attacks towards the transgender community. Hell, I didn't even talk about the bills that passed the House in December, H.R. 498 or H.R. 3492, or even the hundreds of other attempts to pass federal laws to make it harder to be a transgender person in this country. And it is my hope that the Democrats gain some sort of spine and protect marginalized Americans, not just the trans community. Not just the trans community, but all minorities. But I'm not holding my fucking breath. But here is hoping and working for a better 2026 than we had in 2025. And as always, everyone, stay safe, stay vigilant, stay hydrated. I'll see you all in the next episode.